I got Christie's learned, but each of y'all are all distinctive, but she's got her distinctive characteristics. And with the 2 large online classes, I think hasn't helped any either. I've got somewhere around 20 students in 2 of the online classes. And then I've got somewhere, I think 12, 15 in this class online. It's larger than the other 2, I know that, and it's somewhere up there, the 12 range or something. So, and then I've got 1, 2, then I've got a small class for server, because it's got 6, I believe, in it. And I've got the 4th semester of Cisco that's got 1 student in it. But the rest of them that would have been in that class took it fall when they could do combined, but this 1 student couldn't. He had, it's transient, and his school wouldn't approve him to do 2 courses in 1 semester. So I'm doing him by himself. So I've ended up with 6 sections out there, I believe, of students. So you can see they're all sizes. But the one that's in the advanced Cisco, I never hear from him, and he turns in everything every week, and there's not much work to do in that course anyway. So that one's not taking a whole lot of work from me, other than I just had to put dates in it because it's identical and it copied over correctly from fall semester, other than I had to change stuff. In the fall they did it in 1 week, he gets 2 weeks to do stuff. So, and then I have to activate his test, obviously, just like y'all. At this point, every class, I believe, unless Blackboard has gone and deleted stuff on me again, I've got every class completely laid out for the rest of the semester out there in Blackboard. So the only, in y'all's class, everything should be showing out there, should be there and either showing now or will pop up at the appropriate time, like test. Aren't all showing out there, but they're showing on the calendar for you. So the calendar should fully show out everything through May the 6th. Okay? Are you in another class of mine or not? And you're not either, are you, Christy? Okay. So if you look on the calendar in Blackboard now, it should be everything showing there. Okay? I do still have to activate the test over the next few weeks for y'all in Cisco. And if you look in test in Blackboard, it's not going to show you the test in the test section there until the week that they're assigned for. However, Chapter 9 is out there now. And it is out there available at Cisco, also at NetAcad. Okay? Which is what we're going to start over in just a minute, unless y'all have questions on 8, because we're going to go ahead and move ahead. The last week, on May 2nd, it's weird, I can tell you dates in May, but I couldn't tell you any dates in April, okay? But Thursday, May the 2nd, we will not have class, because I'm going to Amazon in Atlanta that day for their seminar. Okay? That Tuesday, we'll be planning to go over of you doing the cabling, your final cabling lab, when you got to do the 3 cables again. And Christy, you can't get him to help you, and you can't get Christy to help you. and neither one of you can get me to help you. Okay?
So do we have to memorize it?
No.
Okay.
If you will remind me that day, if I don't do it, I'll put the colors on the board for you.
Okay.
After you've done them a couple more times, you'll know them. Now, from having done Skills USA this last weekend and their competition, their Cisco competition, which they called internet working, one part of what the students that were entered in that had to do was make a straight through cable. Actually our directions didn't say rather straight through or crossover, although I think they all made a straight through for us. And they had to know the colors, because we had a test question on there also for them on there at that point that asked them for what the colors were for 568A and 568B. That was 5 points on there, 500 points that whole day. And we may have had something about the colors on the written test. I don't remember if we had a question on there, but I don't think we did, because it was more general stuff. However, what was on that internet working competition, y'all could do the whole thing, okay? Because it was doing, well, there may have been on the hands-on, on the configuring, there may have been a little bit of something y'all couldn't do, but I think y'all probably could have done, okay? And we had them do the configuring through Packet Tracer, and they had to set up 3 routers and a switch. And then they had to wire it together also, that they had to physically do that, although they did the configs on Packet Tracer. And then they had to do the cabling, they had an interview, and that was it. Because I had 3 judges and I helped with the third one, because the third judge didn't show up till the last minute, which he was there in time. They were supposed to be there at 8 o'clock for orientation, and then for us to sort of get it going, and then we started at 10. The other 2 judges were there at 8 o'clock. One of them pulled up and parked right by my car when I pulled up in the parking lot, so we got there at the same time. And that one of them knew Packet Tracer pretty well, that although she's only been doing it a year, so she's not got a lot more experience than y'all, but she's written a book that used it some on a Network Plus book. But a year ago, she didn't know what it was, because she and I were taking the same Train the Trainer class, and the instructor went to start doing stuff with Packet Tracer in it, and she was one that was going, she wasn't sure what he was talking about, but she was comfortable with it now, so she graded that part. The other lady that was judge, she actually has a Cisco background, used to help run the Cisco Academies back in the early 2000s, now does VMware Academy. So she wasn't as sure on that part, but she did the interviews, and she was real comfortable doing that, so that fit perfectly. And then that left them cabling their devices together and making their wire. And so I took that on until the other one walked in, and when he came in and we told him what we were doing, and I said, and you can do this part, because really I wasn't a judge, I was chair. So we handed, he said that suited him fine, he could do that, but he could check cabling and stuff on it, check that all off on him. So he basically took that over, although he had to go do something else. He was from the state office, and he had to duck out for a minute at some point, and so I covered on him. Actually, I think it's when the 3 of them went down to get lunch, and we had 1 student left at that point, and we had lunch. They had lunch for us down there, so I told them they could, and the 1 student was working on one thing, and I said, y'all go on down, and I'll just watch him, because y'all might as well go ahead and get lunch right now. And the guy finished what he'd been working on for a good while on his packet tracer, so I went ahead and had him do the cabling and checked him off on that. And then when Jill got back, she went through and graded his packet tracer for him. Which at that point he could be gone because we didn't have them with anything. So that worked real smoothly. Susan had told me she had to leave by 2 o'clock. Last 2 years when I did programming, we ran till 3 or after. This year, we were essentially done at 1 o'clock. We still had to put the scores together, finish putting them together, but they had brought up lunch to me, and I ate my lunch sitting there. Jason's Deli supplied. They bought lunch from Jason's Deli's, who the conference got for the judges and stuff. So I ate my sandwich on that, and then we put the scores together, and we were done there shortly after 1 as far as that part. And then I had to go turn it all in, and then I took a whole bunch of equipment with me. Well, 3 routers and a couple of switches and all of the cabling stuff, plus all of that pile of cable like back there, that yellow and blue cable. There's a pile of it sitting in the back seat of my car out there. If you're not sure which is my car, you can go look in the back seats of cars, and the one that's got a pile of cable in it's mine. It belongs on the other campus, and I didn't get it in over there yesterday because I took in the wiring stuff, and then when I was going to take in the equipment and stuff, I didn't get a real chance to do on that, and the 2 times I went to go do that was when we had the rain showers come through yesterday. And I actually was sitting there getting ready to go home and stayed an extra hour because of that storm that clobbered about 5 o'clock.
Some people at work said it was hailing.
Hmm?
Some people at work yesterday said it was hailing over there in Ringgold.
Mrs. Crumley and I were wondering on that when it started, because when it started, she was in my office, and the office across from me, Mr. Verlock's office, got windows, and we heard it hitting the windows, and we went, is that hail the way it was hitting? But then when we looked at it, we thought it was just real large drops hitting on it, but it may have been hail. Since with what you're saying there, then we may have had hail at that point, because it was banging off the windows. But you know how big drops can, with the wind hitting on them, can sound too on window.
My work is just like a mile away from the campus over there, so.
Because we walked over to when it started, and we heard it, and we went, is that hail? And we walked into the empty office and looked. And we didn't think it was, but it could have been partly in there too that we missed or whatever. So it may well have hailed. It sounded like it. It just didn't look like it when we looked at it. But it was rough. And then when I let out this class yesterday, I went a minute too long because I finished up, and then that morning storm hit. When it came through, it wasn't long, if you remember, but it flat out came down for a minute or 2 on it, and the students were going, I should have finished a little quicker. All right, so that's what I did for the weekend. And then Georgia Northwestern did good. We didn't have anybody entered in my contest, and there were supposed to be 5 in that contest I was doing, and 4 people showed up. So I was out of there at 3 o'clock, because then it took me a little bit to turn in the scores. I had to go find the room, turn them in, and then where the room was I was in, and where my car was up at the front of the building was a long distance, and it took about 3 or 4 trips to carry all the stuff out. And so it was essentially 3 by the time I left. Then I stopped and talked to a couple of people on the way out too. But I was out of there reasonable. Saturday morning, we did the awards. And I say Georgia Northwestern, I think, took home 17 medals, if I remember right, with about 1/3 of them gold, about 1/3 silver, and 1/3 bronze, and won things in different areas. So if you're still here next spring, you're welcome to enter that stuff. Next year, this year it was at Atlanta Tech. Next year will be at the World Congress Center. And then nationals this year are in Louisville, Kentucky, where they've been for a couple of years now. But next year they will be at the World Congress Center, which is why the Georgia competition's at the World Congress Center, is for a practice run for the nationals. Is that if you run the smaller one of the Georgia one in the World Congress Center, that you can figure out what some of the snags are to not have occur when you have the national one there in July. So they're doing both in the World Congress Center next year. And they've already asked me some information about how to run it next year and want me to run it again, which I think I probably will with this one. If it had have gone like programming did and like some of the pre-stuff did on this, I was not going to do it again. I was going to skip out, but it went smoothly Friday. So I think I'll do again on it. And that we figured out some bugs this year. So it should go even smoother next year, particularly the pre-stuff, because now I know what in the world we're doing. I didn't know, and I think I can get at least 2 of those 3 judges back next year, probably all 3 of them, that will come help again. And if I could get a team like them again, that made it go real simple too. And then I had an assistant chair who helped get started. He brought in some stuff too and had more stuff in his car. But then he wasn't there during it, and that was intentional. He had a student entered in it, and we were going, and he was really helping with programming a little bit more, which needed some help. And so we had agreed on that, but he did a lot to help me too. He's from the Ogeechee Tech College. All right, Chapter 8. Is there any questions on that one? The test is out there. You've got till April the 8th to do the test on 8. So that's available there. Next week, we do not have class, in case y'all didn't know it. I'll remind you that on Thursday also. And then I say on May 2nd, we won't have class either. Okay? And we'll do the cabling on that Tuesday. And we may do the cabling actually on the previous Thursday, depending on how we're running on schedule.
So that'll be the final?
That's the lab final.
Okay.
Now you've got a final to do at Cisco also.
Okay.
Okay, which that one you will do May 4th through 6th. So that'll be available Saturday through Monday. And Monday and Tuesday are final exam days at the college, so I'm giving you the weekend plus one of the final exam days, which is how I try to do it normally, is to have finals, if they're online, over a weekend, and then also on one of the final days. So it's your choice when you do it in there, but because the online class, some of them can only do it on the weekend, do stuff on the weekend in the courses. Some of them have more specific days during the week they can do stuff, but if I'm giving them the weekend and a weekday, then they should be able to get that scheduled in somehow to do it. That I've given them a variety of choices. So that's that. Chapter 9 is relatively short. It's the transport layer. So we're moving up to the layer 4. 4 didn't sound right to me, but it is layer 4. For some reason, network seems like it should be the 4th layer, but it's not. It's the 5th layer. So we're looking at the transport layer. And that basically you've only got two protocols involved on the transport layer. You've got TCP and that you've got UDP. Now, historically, and I have not seen this on anything recently, you used to have mention of the Novell protocol for this layer, which was SPX. Don't ask me what SP stands for. I'm really not sure where the X's came from. Where on layer 5, remember, Novell had IPX. And I'm told you be aware of that one, because I do see that one still pop up sometimes. But SPX, I never did see much on it anyway, okay? But that was Novell's transport protocol. Just as a reminder on if you do ever get asked about Novell protocols, look for ones that end in X. Okay? And if you ever get asked about a protocol that ends in the letter X, see if Novell is a choice of what type it is or something, or that Novell is somewhere mentioned in an answer. Okay? Because Novell, for some reason, would put X's generally on their protocols. Likewise, Apple. What did I tell you falls on their protocol names? And they're not used a whole lot more either, just like Novell's. And both companies are obviously still in existence. Apple, last I checked, Apple still existed. They just revealed a whole bunch of stuff this last week of new gadgets and everything at their big show. So, and Novell actually is still in business too, and you will find Novell used by some places around. Primarily, the places you'll find Novell ever in use still nowadays is running networks in school systems. Although, I just learned of a business in our area that is running Novell in the last week. Now, in all of those cases, almost, they're running modern versions of Novell. They're running, I think it's 7 now is the current version, but they're running 5, 6, or 7, which run off TCP/IP actually. And so you really don't see those other protocols anyway on there. But it was the big one for a good while. So, but with Apple, what's the key word you're looking for on protocols that are Apple's? Talk. That you will see on their protocols, the word talk comes in a lot of their protocols that they developed. And they did that because they saw it as a communications, that protocols do communications and allow devices to talk to each other, so they put talk on the names of them. So it's not an acronym for anything. That's what it is. Okay? And so that's another one. And those things can sometimes get you 1 or 2 extra questions on some type certification exam or something, and give you a couple of little points right there without knowing all the little detail, without remembering what was Novell's specific protocols or whatever. And even when they were big out there, that was one that would get me around some questions dealing with that on there, that I could look at it and go, okay, I can eliminate certain choices when there were questions about who made it or whatever, where it came from, because I knew certain ones didn't apply to whatever it came from because of just those rules. And if it didn't deal with Apple and there was ones with talk on it, I could throw those answers out, and that narrowed down what I had to figure out. And then you don't have to know everything to do that. And that's the nice part on multiple choice questions, if you can read them right. All right, so Now we've got TCP and UDP are the two that you need to know out there. Okay? On this layer, you're going to be dealing with segments. We talked about frames on layer 2. And we talked about packets as our PDUs on layer 3. And now on layer 4, it is segments. Segments are a whole lot easier than frames and packets. Because remember, on frames and packets, we got into addressing, we got into error checking, we got into time to live, quality of service, and the length of it, and a number of other things on it. Okay? With segments, basically all you got to worry about is that you've got the piece of data there, you've got a number for the segment, and you've got the port number associated with it. And we've talked about ports in a previous chapter, actually, and this chapter mentions on the ports, but really does not go into telling you about what specific ports are. But you remember a few chapters ago, before chapter 6, because 6, 7, and 8, we were tied up into IP addressing and Ethernet. Okay, but if you remember before that, we did talk about port numbers and mentioned on different port numbers were used for different applications. So you're working with those ports here on this layer. The chapter doesn't go into what port numbers are for the different ports. Okay? The only place they mention on any specific number is that in the midst of their example, they give you an HTTP example, which uses what port number? Anybody remember?
1?
I don't know what uses 1. 80. So that your web pages use port 80, unless they're using secure HTTP, which is HTTPS, because you remember I told you that one. The name is one order and the acronym's the other order. That the S appears in 2 different spots. And that one uses 443. Okay? And that's the one that turns a little lock on up there in your browser, and that's the one if you're going to put in your credit card number or other type things, you want it to be using HTTPS. Because that's encrypting the information you're sending across. And that way, when he sends Christy his credit card number, that I can't wiretap the line and catch the credit card number going along and go out and outspend both of you. And buy a new car on his credit card. You do have that large of a credit limit, don't you?
I got a credit card.
You don't even have a credit card, okay? So I guess I can have a hard time stealing his credit card number if he has no credit card. So he doesn't have to worry as much about the encryption as those of us with credit cards have to worry about. Or when I pay my Xfinity bill tonight, that you don't get my checking account number. Okay? So we specifically want those using HTTPS when you're doing stuff like that, so that it is not going to be stolen. Okay? Now that doesn't mean it won't be stolen. I didn't say that. It can still, somebody could break the encryption and get it out of there, but it will take them a good bit of work, and depending on which encryption exactly it's using that the router switches decide to use. Depends on how difficult it gets. So, you've got UDP and TCP. So let's talk about the layer in general for a little bit. The TCP part, I'm going to put that off till Thursday, okay? Because it gets into two specific things that you're going to have to learn, and that is windowing and the three-way handshake. And so we'll talk about that on Thursday. But we'll talk about the rest of it today, and looking at the clock, I'll be out of here early today. And Thursday probably won't take the whole time either, so that's going to put us then over a week ahead. Because then when we come back, that's when we were supposed to do this week, is that week, and so we'll go on into 10 at that point. But that won't hurt on it, because as I say, we've got the final to still do down there at the end, so the last week we weren't going to have available, and actually I've got 11 scheduled for the last 2 weeks, because the last week is short in the online version, actually short for y'all too, because your chapter 11 test is due that Friday, not on that Monday, because that Friday, May the 3rd, is the last day of the semester, and then the finals on Monday and Tuesday, and then I have to get grades in within a day or two after that, so it's another reason for me cutting everything off on that Friday, is to, because there's a bunch of people will wait until the last couple of days to turn stuff in, and even if it's grossly late and loses all kinds of lateness points on it, I still got to go through and grade the stuff, and there's time on that. So I'm getting closer right now. But then next week, I'll probably work on the stuff some next week and hopefully get caught on up, but I don't want to spend most of the week doing grading and school stuff, because I'm actually going to take time off. So, and I've got other stuff. I've got to get some stuff done. I really want to get done. And I'm going to try to work on that a little bit too in the midst of stuff. On the transport layer, as above that point, you were just working with the whole big chunk of data that is being sent. Okay? Or when it comes back, that it works with the whole chunk of data getting ready to give back to people. On the transport layer, the big thing that occurs there is we're going to take that chunk of data and break it into usable parts, because there's a maximum size that you can send stuff across on your networks, and different networks have different sizes on what's that maximum size the information can be. Generally, it's around 1,500 bytes. Okay? Well, depending on what's being sent, it may have to be broken up because it's too large to go across on that. Think about it in the real world. If you want to mail stuff, there is a maximum limit, or send it by UPS, there is a maximum limit on how big of a package you can send through the post office, or that UPS will let you send either. And they actually both sit there at the same thing, or last I knew they did, was that the length of them was 70 inches. So that means the length of your package can't be any bigger than about 6 feet, 2 inches short of 6 feet. That's pretty good size. Basically, the length of your package can't be any bigger than my height. Okay? Depending on how straight I'm standing up, I'm somewhere around 71 inches. Okay? That's a decent length of a package, right? But if you want to send something bigger, you can't send it either of those ways. Does that make sense? And then there's some other dimensions on it too, but that one I can remember. Now, you've got several options. One is we can go contact one of the trucking companies and get them to ship it for us. Okay? Or we can turn around and we can take it apart and ship it in parts, as long as all our parts get no bigger than that rule, and send it in several packages. So if I'm going to send y'all something out there, okay, and it's some big massive thing, okay, that then, maybe I'm going to send you the thing back there to hold all of the rack to hold all our routers and switches, because you notice that's more than 6 feet tall, so that won't go. We can't put it into a package and mail it to you. So I've got a choice. So I could see if I can take it apart, smaller. If I do that, I want to label it where it'll go back together when you get it, because once you get all of the different packages, there should be some type of way of you to know how to put it all back together. It's known as instructions that they put in the packages for you when you buy them. You know, that piece of paper that you pull out and toss to the side, and after nothing else works, you see what in the world is printed on that piece of paper. That's to put something back together to get it bigger than probably, and oftentimes that comes down to the same issue. How big could they ship it? Okay? So you want everything labeled so that it can be put back together. So when we segment the data into the smaller pieces, besides breaking it apart, we're actually going to put on each segment a number, so that when the receiving device gets it, gets all of the parts, one, it'll know it's got all the parts, and two, it'll know how they fit back together. As another example that I like to give is if you want to move a historical brick building. If you want to move one that's framed, you can pretty much usually pick them up and drag them down the road, but sometimes they're too big and you got to assemble them too. Okay? But if it's a smaller thing and it's a wooden structure, you can get those lifted up and put them onto a trailer and run down the road, and somebody sits up on the roof of it and pushes the power lines up and the traffic lights as you go through them. And if you've ever watched them moving them down the road, that's literally what does happen. There's somebody sits up on that roof and does that job. Okay? And then there's somebody sitting in the car in front that's got a big pole sitting on it for them to know that that bridge is not going to let them go under it. Except for in Ringgold, that they don't seem to understand that about the railroad overpass. And just because it says it's so high, we know we can get something that's even higher through it.
Yeah.
But sometimes when they're moving those things on the highway, think about the size of some of the things you pass on the highway. They have disassembled some of those. If they're going to move a modular home or a modular office, they come in parts going down the road, right? You see part of it, and another part of it, and another part. And sometimes those parts can be bigger than what's normally supposed to go down that road. You can actually see boats the same way, and right now we can watch the boats going north on I-75, or particularly if you get over to I-95, you can definitely see a large boats going up the road. Because these super rich people use their boat in the summer up there in the north on the ocean, and then they pay for somebody either to take the boat down by the Intercoastal Waterway in the fall to Florida, to their home down there in Florida, or that these trucking companies will take them back up the highway to the other place. So you'll see them on the highway out there. And I've started seeing the ones headed north now. And that there's still a maximum they can only get to. And sometimes some of these things take up more than a lane, and so we got to have all kinds of markers. But if we wanted to move a brick building, a historical brick building, okay, and that happens occasionally, that there's historical buildings need moved around for whatever reason. We're going to do some construction through an area or whatever, and we're going to build something new there or whatever, but we want to preserve the building. Or they're going to build the road's got to be widened and it's in the way of the road, etc. Or they've decided they want to put it at some museum at some other location. If it's a brick one, that doesn't work real well usually to jack it up and take it down the road. That's asking for a mess, although it does happen, okay? Because bricks come apart. So if it's a historical brick building, they will take it apart brick by brick. But they don't just disassemble all the bricks and make a big pile of bricks sitting there, and when they get to the other end, go and just build brick wall again. They will label every one of those bricks when they take that brick wall down, so that when they build that wall back again, they put every brick exactly back in the same location as it was before. So you've still got the same building. Only difference is it's got new cement in it. But even if you hadn't moved it, you're going to have to update the cement occasionally also, because cement does go bad and drifts out of there. If you're not sure about that, go down to downtown Lafayette and look where the drugstore used to stand, and they still haven't finished cleaning up there yet, where it needed all of the cement repointed in its bricks, and they'd been warned about that, and the building fell in a year ago. Okay? And I suspect that's part of the reason they haven't gotten, because the next building appears to be, it's going to have to be torn down, but I suspect that's all in there because it's a historical building, of rather what can they do to maybe save the thing. But they will label every one of those bricks, so then when they put up the building back up, every brick goes back in its exact same spot where it went in before. And you may not have thought about that on a brick building. Okay, if it was a stone building, yeah, it makes more sense because stones are all different sizes, and probably want to get them all put back together so it all fits back together correctly, because it sort of ends up like a jigsaw puzzle. But bricks, they really want to get them back the same to keep it exactly the same as it was. And they will label the bricks. Okay, well, those bricks are segments that we're talking about today. The whole brick wall is the whole big chunk of data we're sending. Does that make sense? So you're going to break it down into usable sizes, because once we take that brick wall down and we just got a pile of bricks sitting there, we can ship those bricks. That's relatively simple to do, because hopefully we put them on pallets when we took it all apart and we're labeling it, and so now we just got to run the forklift in and stick it on the back of the trailer and off we go. Because bricks do weigh. I put several thousand bricks down in my driveway on the turn area, and I had a massive pile, and I don't remember how many thousands of bricks it was. It took several years for me to get them there, because I actually disassembled. I got bricks from a burned down house, and I went over there and worked weekends for a number of years cleaning bricks to do it. And I didn't have to buy bricks. Now, if you sit there and calculate my time and everything in it, don't do that. You can do that, but don't tell me about it. Okay, and try telling me it would have been cheaper to go buy a bunch of bricks. But it was my work on it. And my German Shepherd was about determined. It wanted me to hit it in the head, I think. Because when I'm sitting there cleaning bricks and tapping concrete off the cement off the bricks, it kept wanting to lay there and put its head into my lap and nudge up in there and lay its head on my lap. And I'm sitting there hitting cement with the hammer on it. And keep trying to keep the dog pushed back from it so I wouldn't hit the dog in the head with the hammer. But she loved being right there with me on it. So you're breaking it into those and you're labeling them. Now the port numbers, you're really not assigning that at this point. That's actually been done in the higher layers that we're going to do in chapter 10. Okay? But it's been brought down on the whole big chunk of data, so we want to put the port number on there also. They mention about sockets in the chapter also, which is actually not belonging in this chapter. chapter. Sockets really should have been in the previous chapter, because a socket actually is the port number and the IP address. Okay? Is the socket. But for some reason it gets mentioned in this chapter. So when they mention sockets, sockets are the port and the IP address. And you've seen that out there when you see addresses for web pages and stuff, that it's some address :80. It usually doesn't appear in your browser. Usually it's off the :80 or the :443, because those are assumed. But if it was using some other number, you will see them there. And sometimes your browser still will show that :80 or :443 on the back of it also. That's a socket. UDP is when we send stuff in a connectionless approach. Okay? What it's saying is that the data is being sent from here to him or to her, and that I'm just sending it, but I get no confirmation back that you got it. Okay? It's been sent. The only thing that I might find out is if you didn't get it or didn't get it all, it's your responsibility, the receiver, to tell the sender that it wasn't all received. Okay? Second thing is, when I send it out, I don't know if anybody even gets it. Could you use a real life example? Radio and TV stations are essentially doing UDP, okay, which is User Datagram Protocol. They're broadcasting stuff out there all day long. Nowadays, all day and all night. Okay? But it used to be a lot of that radio and TV stations generally went off at the air at some point. Okay? And now, I think just about all of them run 24 hours a day. But they send out information all the time and have no real idea, was it received or not? And did anybody pay attention to it? Because if he's a radio announcer, he sits there in the booth and does his radio announcing all day, and there's nothing there telling him anybody is hearing him. Now, if he's a radio announcer, he'll tell us he'd sit here and tell us about the thousands of people that listen to him every day. That's a guess, but he really doesn't know anybody heard him. Okay? Does that make sense? The UDP is doing the same approach. Now, if he goes and really goofs up on the air, he probably will find out that there's some people listening to him, if they are. Because then the telephones at the radio station are going to light up. And if he offers to give the next 15 callers $1 million each, and Christy and I are listening, we're both calling in and going to be one of the first 15, right? We now know you're going to hand it to us in cash because you operate in cash, we found out. So that's the way that one's working, okay? And sometimes there's nobody listening to them. But they don't know that for sure. Now they've got ratings and stuff that are supposed to tell them how many people are listening, but that's depending on people filling out forms. I don't know if any of you have ever had the chance to do that, where a year or two ago I actually was chosen to do ratings for a week, and that for a couple of weeks, for about a month, and that every week for about a month they'd send me a new form and I'd fill it out. If you ever get one of those, take advantage of it. They actually do pay you to do it. They will give you $5 or $10 a week for just filling out this short little survey of what did you listen to when. Okay? So if you get that from, and I can't even remember who the big rating people are, if you get a letter from them, open it up and look at it. Because there's actually probably, there may be money sitting in that envelope, or if not, when you just send them back your general information and then they start sending you the forms, they'll send you money in each one to you, and it's cash they send to you. Okay? That they'll put dollar bills and $5 bills and such in the envelope. So it's well worth paying attention to those. So that's that case. But if we do a telephone conversation, that's going to be like TCP. You know that the other person heard you. Because I'll call up either of you and go to tell you something. You're going to confirm back to me that you heard me. Okay? Because after I tell you whatever it is I want to tell you, I may well go, did you get all of that? Or you understand me? And that you're going to give me back a reply, and I know you received it. Or you're going to go, no, I got lost on what you were saying. And so I got to start again, tell you again. I'm probably going to just tell you a part of it, stop and go, get that, and then tell you the next part, right? Well, when we talk on Thursday, we're going to talk about how that really works on the computer too. Okay? Because that's really getting into windowing. But with TCP, you know it was received. That the sender knows it was received. It requires a conversation back from the receiver. Okay? UDP, throw it out there and hope for the best. Lecture today. And here I know y'all have heard me. I'm going to put it out there hopefully tonight, but I haven't even done last week's yet. I got to get those out there first, and yesterday's. I'm going to put it though, I'm going to put it on the web page. I don't know then, and it's sitting on YouTube actually. I don't know if anybody listening to those specifically or not. Now obviously I can go to YouTube statistics out there, and it will tell me who did connect on to it sometimes. Or it'll tell me how many people at least connected to it, okay? So I will get some type of rating, but I won't know how much of it was received by whoever. I don't have that information. I've just thrown it out there to everybody. And when I put it out there, it actually goes public on YouTube. Some of the other instructors try to keep it private. I go ahead and put it public because if somebody else wants to listen to it, they're more than welcome to listen to me. I'm not sure that there's going to be a bunch of people really wanting to listen to lectures by me, but if that's the way, they're welcome to them. Okay? And if somebody's taking the same class in California and I make sense to them and their instructor doesn't, great. Likewise, if their instructor makes sense to one of y'all more than I do, great for you to be able to hear them and hear their approach on it. Because we all approach it differently. And I haven't got a big problem on that. Okay? And that I listen to stuff all over the place. And I started a Linux class last night, but I haven't heard the first lecture yet because I couldn't do it last night because I had Collaborate. So from 8 to 9, and that first session was from 8 to 10, so somewhere in the next day or so I'm going to listen to the recording, which CompTIA says is fine. And they actually keep statistics off of that. When I go into the recording, they know I listened to it, and they got a timer on it of whether I've got to have it up for at least 110 minutes, or 120 minutes, and then they give me credit. And they give me another certificate to hang on my wall. Although none of those are hanging on my wall, but if y'all want to see those that I've gotten in the last year, there's a pile of them about that deep laying behind my desk. And then I print them out each time and I send them off to the school and whatever. And some of them, those I really don't put them out anywhere, but the certificates certifications I've actually got, I think, sitting all on LinkedIn now. They're sitting on my website, etc. So that you can actually see them, or they should be out there on those, but that may be on my list of things I've got to still fix up a little more. Thursday afternoon, I will not be available. Speaking of that, is at 1 o'clock Thursday afternoon, I'm going to go take the Cloud Plus exam. I've got a voucher that expires this week. I haven't studied a lot for it, but I am actually doing some stuff with Cloud Plus at the moment, so we'll see what happens. I did take the Train the Trainer class, and I did stay at Holiday Inn last week. Unfortunately, it wasn't the Holiday Inn Express, so I don't know if that'll work for being able to pass the exam or not. So if you stay at Holiday Inn Express, you can get brain surgery the next morning. Because y'all remember the ads, them. And so that's the difference between TCP and UDP. So on UDP, there's not a whole lot to know about UDP. It's connectionless. You don't know that your receiver is there. You don't know what you send was actually received. But a lot of stuff works on that. Voice over IP works great on UDP. There's no overhead, very little overhead on UDP. It just breaks it into segments, does nothing extra in the whole process, and just throws stuff out there continuous. Voice over IP works fine on UDP. Okay? You don't worry about on the telephone call if it's some pieces get dropped on it along the way of just some small parts, no big problem. If it messes it up too much, and then I've got a call between me and one of y'all, and it drops too much of it, and remember the school is using voice over IP from here, that if it drops too much of it, you're going to tell me on the call, I didn't understand you, and I'll retell you on it. Okay? But there could be little pieces missing, and you never even know it as the person listening. Does that make sense? Because think about it, on phone calls anyway, there's little bits, pieces lost all the time anyway. Calls have gotten a lot clearer now than they used to be, but still static gets in there occasionally, something gets in there occasionally, background noise jumps in the midst of it. One of you decides to hold your dog that starts barking in the midst of the conversation, or whatever. So UDP works fine on that, because it doesn't have to all be there. That transaction account we were talking about earlier, we don't want to do that one on UDP. We need every bit when I go to order something, or when I go to pay my Xfinity bill tonight. I want every bit to get to Xfinity, right? They got to get my whole credit card number or checking account number to do that, right? Because otherwise, Christy might get upset, because if it drops one of the bits in my account number, the account number it suddenly now appears as maybe Christy's account. And that'll work fine for me, but probably doesn't work well for her when my payment comes out of her account instead of my account. Or comes out of some account that you got somewhere, but obviously didn't come off your credit card. So we want that one to be specifically exactly correct. The other part is I want to make sure that they get the right amount I'm actually paying them, right? So I don't want an extra bit to occur in front of the whole number, that if I owe $100 for my bill, I don't want it to add an extra bit on the front of it and change it into $1,100. That could be a problem, right? Xfinity probably would like that one, but then they probably wouldn't be happy if it dropped a leading bit or a blight of it, and that what I was paying them and they marked as paid in full was that I only paid them $10 on the $100 bill. Okay? That would work good for me too, but it doesn't work well for them. So, some things have got to go through TCP. Some things go through UDP. And actually, oddly enough, you're actually going to do a lot more things UDP than TCP. Okay? Because there's a lot of stuff goes across the internet that it's not got to be fully accounted for. But there's some stuff's got to be. When I upload my files for my web pages, when I've written, changed them, whatever, they're on my computer at my house, and then I go to upload it so it takes effect, send it out to the server, it's the host in Canada. I want every bit to get there to Calgary, Canada. Okay? So I've got to use TCP to do that. Y'all follow? I don't want it to be chancy on it because then my web page may or may not work. I need to know every bit really was received by them. Does that make sense? So that's UDP, is just connectionless and just sends it. Segments is what we're working with completely on this layer. And then we got the segment numbers on them. Okay? That leaves TCP to talk about. And we'll talk about the three-way handshake. You'll know what that is by the time we walk out Thursday. Notice I've said it to you a couple of times now. And if I mention it a number of times, or the book mentions it a number of times, it's probably important for the test, right? And you'll know what windowing is, and we're not talking about windows on the PC, but we're going to talk about windows and windowing, which is a whole totally different thing. Okay? Although, in a way, it's a piece of the same thing, because it's the idea behind the whole thing, because that's called Windows because Microsoft saw it, Bill Gates and company, and Bill was involved with it back then in 81, 83 when they started Windows, is that you're looking at various pieces of the world through different windows on it. And that you've got lots of looking at various things all at the same time. But you're not seeing the whole things always of anything, but you're seeing various parts. This is the same thing we're going to do here in TCP, is we're going to see how we're sending just a part and a part and a part at a time. And so it's windowing. Because when we look out that window out there, we're seeing just part of the parking lot out there. And then if I move to another location, I see a different part of the parking lot. And that's the same idea as happening there on Microsoft Windows. And the same idea is going to be happening in these windows in the windowing of TCP. The concept of all three being the same, but the three things all being different things. Does that make sense? But if you ever wondered where the name Windows came from, that's where it came from. Okay? And you think about the logo on it. What's the logo? This 4 windows picture there that you're seeing where you could see 4 different things. And that's what's on that desktop. If we were on the desktop right now, we got a whole bunch of windows into different things. We're seeing something of them. Prior on DOS, you just got to see the whole thing at one time, but you could only see one thing at times. So it wasn't like that. But Windows gave you a much more viewage. All right, I will see you Wednesday if y'all don't have any questions. Thursday.